This is Counting Sheep, and tonight I'm going to play a little bit with my felted paintings, show a few of them to you, and do maybe some textures and a little bit of tapping on a couple of the frames, and maybe some finger fluttering and that sort of thing for relaxation. So let's start with the first one. I'm going to start with this one, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about how the process works. This one has wool, silk, embroidery, stitches. I don't know if you can see those from there, but I'll hold it up close in a moment. And then some beadwork, where I just put on some beads for a little added interest. Each one is different, and I'm going to talk to you about how I came upon this and why I'm drawn to it. If you look closely, you should be able to see some machine stitching. It's called freeform stitching that you can do in quilting, but you can do it with a regular machine. If you look up freeform, it'll kind of teach you how to make your machine work in the same way as a quilting machine. And so what I do first is lay down tufts of wool into different shapes and patterns, and they're very bulky at first. Sometimes I pull them out of the roving, the wool roving. Sometimes I cut little bits into place. And the techniques that I use, I originally learned from a woman who is an amazing, she calls it felt and stitch painting. And I was just doing needle felting at first with little fairies, and then I started wet felting handbags and slippers. And then I saw this woman, Moy McKay, on, I think it was a BBC special. And it wasn't long, but it was her just showing her working with merino wool and a little bit of silk and different things to create these gorgeous paintings. And you can just needle felt a painting, where you start with a pre-felt is what it's called, like a merino pre-felt base that's a very loosely felted sheet so that things can easily felt to it. You can use it for creating clothing, scarves as well. And then you layer on wool. And you can take the roving, and I'll get some roving a little later and show you, but you put it into one of these combs, and then you take the other comb and you pull it in the opposite direction. I'm not going to actually make contact because it was incredibly loud last time, but you kind of rough it up, and then you move it different directions and rough it up and then pull it off, and then it's just kind of this big fluffy ball of felt. But what's great about that is that it makes the fibers go all different directions, so it helps them felt a little quicker. So sometimes I will just lay down, like this green and this pink is just a light tuft of the roving, and I'll lay it down on the base for design. And other times I might take a piece of the carded wool and place it on into shapes. And it's very full and fluffy. And if you want to see the process, I have lots of mine sped up in Instagram, and I put music behind them and show the process of the paintings. So I will put some of that information below, so know that you can do that. But it's very satisfying. I found it much more satisfying than if you buy the pre-felt and draw your lines on it, then you can felt on top of that. And there are amazing dry felt artists or needle felt artists. And you work with these long barbed needles and poke and poke and poke into shapes. And there's an amazing needle felt artist that I'll link below as well, who does really unique line work. And I don't know how she does it. She just creates the most beautiful drawings or paintings. And if you do the dry needle felt, you can often create a more realistic look. If you do the dry felting technique, needle felting, you can really create a lot of very intricate detail. But when you wet felt first, the advantage and the disadvantage is that it creates a depth that is very unique to wet felting, and a mixture of colors and textures that is, again, very unique to the wet felting process. But the downside of it is you can't entirely control the final result, whereas needle felting you can much more have control. With wet felting, once you add soap and water, it moves the wool around a little bit, and you have to massage it lightly at first. What I do is after I put down the design, I put this knitting on. There are many different ways to do wet felting. This is what I have come to. And then I use a browser ball, which is this. And I fill a bowl with soap water. And then I suck this soap water mixture into the browser ball and squeeze it all over the top of the design. And then at first, just very gently push it down, and then very slowly start to massage the fibers very gently, because they can move a lot at first. And then you peel back the netting, and you are best not to pull up. That just pulls up the felt, so you have to really peel it back carefully. And then there's a whole series of tooling it in with scissors or any pointy object that's metal that won't have too much of the fiber stick to it. And then I put the netting on and do a little more and then shape it. So you get it as close to the shape you want. And sometimes I add a little fiber to it if I see it needs it. And I've worked both usually silk in. It felts at a different level, or let's see, it felts differently than wool. And each type of wool felts differently as well. So you'll have merino that felts really soft and flatten quickly, and then you have more fibrous sheep wool that is like Maori wool that felts much more rigid and more coarse. It's more coarse fiber, so they'll felt at different rates. So you have to think about that if you're going to work with different fibers in a drawing. It can be complicated. And then I will sometimes stitch. I'll show you a different one. This is just needle felted after, so I let it dry overnight. And then I will needle felt the edges to help them pop. I wonder if you can see that. If I turn it a certain way, that it starts to create a three-dimensional effect if I needle felt around certain edges. And then sometimes I'll add on some more here. I put some shadowing in afterward with some dry felting and the needle. They're these long needles with barbs on the end that push the fibers in to themselves. In a moment, I'll show you some more silk. Silk is really wonderful to create another dimension in the paintings, but it doesn't felt to itself, so you have to have wool with silk if you want to wet felt it. And then on this one, of course, for added texture, this one's called Purple Prickly, I added on just a few beads. I just do that every once in a while. So this is kind of a fun frame to play with. I'll see if some of those sounds will come through for you. So I like to reclaim frames, which is sometimes a little problematic. Sometimes I'll get one from the thrift store and get home and find out that I can't get the painting out that's in it. So I have to be sort of, careful with how much I spend on thrifting a frame, and I can't afford the really fancy frames. I wish I could to get them framed nicely, but I can't sell them for a price that will justify expensive frames. So I'll thrift them. Sometimes I repaint them. And I'm learning how to do, this one has the old taping on the back, which just doesn't look great. I'll pull that price tag off. So this doesn't look great. I've learned now how to do the backing where you put on the paper, and it's a whole process, and I won't talk about that, but they're getting more professional looking on the back. But it's still tricky if I'm using, which I prefer to use a reclaimed frame. It's still tricky because with the reclaimed frames, I find that sometimes there are just the ways the hardware's been put on the back that it just won't, I can't make it look really nice on the back. So that's the challenge. This one is from a photograph that I saw of a vase or vase, however you're used to saying it, of Delphinium. I call it Delphinia because that's the plural Latin name. But it was just beautiful. So obviously it has a more, would you say impressionistic look? It wouldn't say really that it's impressionist because that was typically done, true impressionism was done originally at least outside, and getting a moment in time. That's why they had that really kind of ethereal look that's looser. But that's what I love about the wet felting, is it has some of that. Now this one has all of the elements stitching. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it in this lighting, but I've stitched around a lot of these flowers to give some added dimension. So not just needle felting, but then I go in and stitch. And that's a method I learned, again, from that Moy McKay. And then I'll go in and add some other textures with embroidery. And here I have different kinds of embroidery, as you can see. Different stitches, I should say. I've got lots of French knots and just different kinds of detail that I'm able to put in with some of the stitches. But this lovely little background here and here, these little squiggles, are silk. And that's what's so wonderful about the silk, is it will create some other textures, so you can pull some through and get some different plant or leaf elements with that. And then I add also some that were just from the wool. And then I've stitched quite a bit on top of this one as well. And then this is just different shades of wool that create that dimension of shadow and light. And then at the base, you can see I've stitched to add also some of that dimension there. So there's my Delphinium, or Delphinia is the name, what I named this painting. I do love doing flowers. Okay, I had to wait for the sounds upstairs to settle because there was some water shower going or something was loud. So this painting I made from a photograph that I saw online that was, it didn't have the fence, it didn't have all of some of the things in here, but it was this beautiful kind of craggy, is that the right word, tree against this winter sky and on the snow. And so I kind of played with that here. And you can see kind of three tones of the white, like the whitish gray sky, and then there was some brush in the background that was just a mid-tone of gray, and then the foreground of the snow. And so I found also some what's called wool nepps. We'll see if I can get it at an angle where you can see them. They're little balls of wool that were left over from felting processes that you can purchase in different colors, and you put them in the wool and felt them in. So kind of fun playing with textures in the foreground, and then played with this little fence in the background and used a technique of stitching there with putting in some highlights, kind of keeping some of it under the felt. And that is from a Moy McKay tutorial, online tutorial. So this tree is a mix of wool, and I did a couple of different colors so that it would have a little bit of dimension. May not read on the camera. and then also some silk noils. And I might have even put some black flax roving in this. There are even vegetable um, rovings that have, been made from different kinds of plants. And anyway, and they felt differently. So all of them create a really kind of cool effect. You can see the silk noils up here, where it's just really a different, branching pattern there. And the picture had all these branches. So then once it was done and dried, then I, of course, needle felted around the edges to make it pop a little more. And then I did stitch, and you can see I stitched in here. And I stitched a lot of these branches came from the sewing machine, freeform, which was really fun because then again, you get to play with a different medium in a way with the art and work with it in a different way. So this one I had fun. I did it in fast motion on my Instagram so that you could see pieces of the process. I can't, it takes a few days to make one, so I can't. I have to just show bits and pieces, even of the rolling. So I was going to show you, when I talk about the roving, it's this. This one is a Merino. And Merino is, for me, easiest to work on for these kinds of paintings, but I've definitely used other kinds. There's also, as I said, silk. But you take little tufts of it, and if you pull hard, it won't come out. If you grip and pull, it won't come. But if you just hold it very loosely and just take a little bit gently and pull, it comes out just ever so lightly. Looks almost like a cotton candy. And then you lay it on the painting. I would do layers if I wanted it. This would be a very thin, looked like a watercolor brush stroke. And, that way, or I can card it. But it's that simple just as far as the fibers. The process gets a little more complicated, but as far as the colors and playing with it, it's really a wonderful medium to work in. And I started doing this when I was out of work. I told you on a couple videos ago. I started with just fiber and needles and playing with the fairies. I tried to sell some of them also to try and make some money. It's not a money maker, most of this, but I get to enjoy the process, and I do like to sell them because if somebody enjoys them as much as I do, it brings me a lot of joy. It really does. It is. There are a few that I've held on to, but honestly, it makes me really happy to have them go to homes where they are loved and appreciated. This one was taken for, it looks very abstract and strange, I know. This element here is silk. You can see how it's felted. I did a little different color too than the background of the white waves. So this is the ocean, and it was again taken from a photograph that I saw. I want to say it was a beach in maybe Brazil, but there were umbrellas all over this sand that looked very pink. And so these are representing little people in umbrellas, and I've done some stitching too. That's kind of my little signature stitch. But, and then the sand gradually became very orange, and then the waves came in and created their own pattern, and then the ocean was this gorgeous turquoise blue. So anyway, that's how I came up with this design. And then I did find a reclaimed, this one's in really good condition, but I found a wood frame that worked nicely with it. Felt like it needed a little wood to go with the beach. And then I've just got one more that's pretty crazy. It's one I've done recently as well. This one is called Gossamer Grove. Look how crazy that one is. I'll maybe play with the frame of this one at the end too, because it's got some texture on it. And this one is a blend of lots of different fibers. And I've got locks on here, which are long pieces of sheep fur that I dyed. You can also purchase them in colors. And then this is silk, and you can see how it kind of gets that zigzaggy element to it because it's felting differently. It has to have the wool behind it to felt to. The moon I did out of a silk. There it is. And then I covered it a little bit with some light bits of roving, and you can see how that works. Also, I'm going to turn it this way. There is something that you can buy that's old silk saris that have been shredded. And it's wonderful because you feel like you're recycling something, and it creates this really cool webbed effect. And because I was wanting to kind of create a Halloween-y scene, this Gossamer Grove has that element. And I don't think it's going to read on the camera, but there's a sheen, just a light, shiny sheen that comes through from the silk. So this one I had all kinds of fall colors, and it's also fun because after it's wet felted, you're not sure what things will end up looking like. So as you look at the painting, you still have to interpret it more afterward. And like I've got little tiny stems or branches, trunks, that's what I'm trying to say here. You can see I did quite a bit of stitching over the trunks of the trees, a lot of embroidery, but also these little bits of wool nepps that were in gold. I was able to add some stitching to those because after you see it, you're like, what does that look like? And it looks like little groupings of shrubs to me. And everybody can see it differently. But there's lots of texture to it, which is what I love. And then I did a lot of machine stitching on this one as well to create some layers, dimension to the drawing so that it takes you back. There's a stitching here, and that allows our eyes to kind of see the distance differently. And then some little stars in the night sky, just a couple. So that is me playing with a few of my felted paintings. Wet felt, needle felt, and then stitched. And now I'll just play with this frame for a bit. It felt like a nice fall pattern that also felt like it kind of held that night glow to it from my Gossamer Grove. I have a website that I'll maybe link into this a couple of times. It's right now just a gallery that I use if I'm going to do a show that I can show kind of portfolio. But I've just got it up and running, and I hope eventually to be able to sell some paintings on there. The shipping is the hard part. You have to keep them under, I think has to be under 22 inches by, I don't know. It starts to get really expensive if I do them too big. So I also don't have a big enough rolling mat to do very large ones, but I would love someday to be able to do that. To make one or two really nice big felted paintings. Probably a landscape. Maybe a large still life bouquet. Okay, my friends, I hope this time worked. This was my third round. There were technical difficulties. This one doesn't work. It's also day 2. Then I probably won't end up posting, but I'm hoping that this works out. Have a great night. Thanks for stopping by.